I never imagined that a first-class upgrade would turn into a lesson about privilege, prejudice, and revenge. The moment I stepped onto that plane, I could feel the stares, the kind that quietly ask, "Are you sure you belong here?" But when I reached my seat, the shock hit harder. Someone was already sitting there, calm, confident, and certain I didn't deserve it. What started as a stolen seat quickly became a fight against something much deeper. And by the end of that flight, no one would ever forget what happened in first class. It had been one of those rare weeks when everything finally seemed to go right. After months of back-to-back work, I was heading to a long-awaited conference, and for once, luck smiled on me. The airline upgraded my ticket to first class. I remember staring at that notification on my phone, feeling a quiet pride that my hard work was being recognized in some small way. For me, it wasn't just a seat. It was a symbol. A reminder that I'd earned my place, no matter where I came from or what I looked like. The morning of the flight was smooth. Security, check-in, everything felt almost too easy. But beneath the calm surface, I could sense the silent judgments that often follow me, the glances, the tightened smiles, the unspoken, "You don't fit the picture." I'd learned to brush it off, to stay polite, to prove through calmness what others doubted because of skin. When I finally boarded, the cabin smelled of fresh coffee and privilege. Leather seats, soft lighting, flight attendants greeting passengers by name. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax. My seat was near the window, perfect. I pictured myself sipping juice, watching the world shrink beneath the clouds. But the moment I reached my row, my breath caught. Someone was already there, stretched out comfortably, scrolling through their phone as if they owned the sky. I checked the seat number again, thinking I must have made a mistake. But no, that was my seat, my name, my ticket. And when I politely mentioned it, the look I received, a smirk mixed with disbelief, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was about something much uglier. At first, I tried to handle it the polite way, the way we're taught to. I smiled, held up my ticket, and explained there might be a mix-up. The man barely looked up from his phone. "I think you're mistaken," he said, his voice calm but dripping with something colder. He pointed toward the back of the plane. "I'm pretty sure your seat's back there." The words stung, not because of what he said, but because of how familiar they felt. That same quiet assumption. You don't belong here. The flight attendant arrived just in time for the tension to thicken. I handed her my boarding pass. She glanced at it, then at him. For a moment, I thought she'd fix it. But then came that uneasy smile, the one that says she doesn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, turning to him, "but this passenger is assigned to this seat." He didn't move. Instead, he leaned back, his eyes locked on me. "Well, maybe he printed the wrong ticket," he said. The flight attendant hesitated. People nearby began to watch, whispering. My heart pounded. Not from fear, but from the quiet rage that builds when you've seen this pattern too many times. A second attendant arrived. Then a supervisor. More apologies, more hesitation. I stayed calm, but every word they spoke made it clear. They were afraid to inconvenience him. The man who had stolen my seat was white, well-dressed, and confident. I was none of those things, at least not in their eyes. Finally, one of them offered me a temporary solution. "Sir," she said, "there's an open seat in business class just for now. We'll sort it out after takeoff, just for now." I stared at her, realizing what was really happening. They were moving me instead of confronting him. My voice trembled, but I refused to move. "This is my seat," I said, "and I'm not leaving it." That's when the cabin temperature seemed to drop. The man smirked again, muttering something under his breath. Something about entitlement and people like you. The flight attendant looked away, pretending not to hear. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, judging, waiting to see if I'd lose my temper. But I didn't. I sat down, right there in the aisle, next to my rightful seat, and waited. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just sat. Minutes passed. The whispers grew louder. The man called for the crew again, pretending to be the victim. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I don't feel safe with him sitting here." The words hit like a slap, twisting the story, turning me into the problem. That's when the pilot was called out from the cockpit. He looked tired, annoyed that something was holding up departure. The attendants quickly filled him in, conveniently skipping over the details that mattered most. He walked over, looked at the two of us, then back at the boarding passes, and then something in his expression changed. He didn't say a word, but I saw it, the shift from irritation to realization. He turned to the crew and said quietly, "We're not taking off until this is resolved properly." The cabin went silent. The man's confidence faltered for the first time. The attendants exchanged nervous glances, and that's when I realized this wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about finally being seen, and what would happen next would make everyone on that flight remember my face long after we landed. The silence in that cabin was louder than any argument I could have started. The pilot's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. "We're not taking off until this is resolved." I could see the man's confidence crack, a subtle twitch in his jaw, a flicker of panic that betrayed the arrogance he wore minutes ago. The flight attendants scrambled, whispering in low voices, their smiles gone. Passengers began to murmur, phones lifted discreetly to record. The man suddenly shifted his tone, trying to sound reasonable, but his eyes still carried that cold resentment. "This is ridiculous," he said louder this time. "He's making a scene over nothing." Nothing. That word burned. It wasn't nothing, it was everything. It was every time someone assumed I didn't belong, every door that closed before I even knocked, every polite smile masking silent prejudice. The pilot turned toward me, calm but firm. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" I handed it over. He studied it carefully, then looked straight at the man. "You're in the wrong seat," he said flatly. "And until you move, we're not going anywhere." For a moment, the man didn't move. He stared at the pilot as if waiting for him to change his mind. But the silence stretched too long. The stares grew heavier. He stood up abruptly, muttering under his breath, brushing past me without meeting my eyes. As he walked away, I sat down in my seat, the one I had paid for, earned, and defended. But instead of relief, there was a deeper ache. The flight attendants avoided eye contact. The passengers whispered. And somewhere in the back, I could hear him complaining about how sensitive things have become these days. When the engines finally roared to life, I stared out the window, not at the clouds, but at my reflection. For the first time, I wasn't just tired of the racism. I was tired of staying quiet. And as the plane lifted off, I made a silent promise that this story wouldn't end in silence. Not this time. When the plane finally landed, people rushed to grab their bags, pretending nothing had happened. The man who had stolen my seat was the first to leave, head down, avoiding eye contact. But the pilot, the only one who had truly stood up for what was right, waited near the exit. As I passed, he gave a small nod, the kind that says, "I saw everything." That simple gesture meant more than I expected. It wasn't victory, not really, but validation. Proof that sometimes silence doesn't win. I walked through the terminal feeling the weight of what had just happened. Not just a stolen seat, but a reminder of how invisible someone can feel when prejudice hides behind politeness. Later that night, I received an email from the airline apologizing for the inconvenience. They offered a voucher and a promise of training improvements. But what I wanted couldn't fit in a corporate apology. I wanted awareness. Not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been made to feel out of place in a space they've rightfully earned. So I told my story, not to shame, but to shed light. Because racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through actions, through looks, through quiet moments where dignity is tested. That flight taught me something crucial. Standing your ground doesn't always mean shouting louder. Sometimes it's the strength to sit still, to refuse to be erased. And maybe that's what real revenge is. Not payback, but presence. Refusing to disappear, refusing to let ignorance define your worth. So, the next time someone tries to tell you where you don't belong, remember this. Belonging isn't granted, it's claimed. Because in a world where seats can be stolen and silence can be louder than hate, Sometimes the most powerful act of defiance is simply staying seated,